Thank you. Good morning. I have no better words than my devotional language to honor a gathering like this. In Arabic, we say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammad abduhu wa rasuluh. We always begin in the name of God, in the name of good. And that was a great introduction. And we have a prayer in Islam that we pray that God makes us worthy of the compliments that we get. The idea of rebellion. To me, the realest rebels are actually very obedient. We're very loyal and we're very obedient, but we're obedient to something that's unpopular. So in my case, I'm obedient to God and I'm obedient to the things that I believe that entails, meaning freedom and truth and justice and the dignity and preciousness of a human being. So when we're loyal to those things, when we're obedient to those things in a climate that's not, that makes us a rebel to some and a servant to others, depending on your point of view. And so my obedience to those things has, made me willing to accept all of the things that come along with that. I personally have been flagged and interfered with by the Department of Homeland Security. They intercepted a wire transfer of mine one time that was for a large amount of money. And I actually needed to get this money back to pay the group of people that were traveling with me. These, on the road at that time, 10 months out of the year, with all of these men that feed their families based on this income. And the Department of Homeland Security, intercepted it, and I had to get on the phone with them and basically give them the information that they needed to track me, and also give them a verbal acknowledgement that I knew that they were going to be watching me from that point on. And around the same time, I also was scheduled to do some touring that was sponsored by a big corporation. And because of the music that we were making and the statements that we were making and the stands that we were taking, that corporation dropped me off their tour, removed the support. And since then, we've been supported entirely by people, and by people that appreciate what we're doing. And so we're grateful for that. Two things that I want to mention, or two things that are in my head right now, is that, first of which is that this is Black History Month. And today is actually the anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X, who's my personal hero. I grew up on hip-hop music. I found my way to interact with the world through Black culture and through hip-hop music particularly. And when I was 13 years old, I met one of my heroes, an MC by the name of KRS-One. And I went to a lecture that he gave, and he brought me on stage, and he recommended that I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And so I did that when I was about 13. And Malcolm X was the most truthful, honest, courageous person that I could have imagined in my mind at that time, and even now, 25 years later or whatever, for a lot of reasons. And as I grow, and the more that I grow, the more that I learn, the more that I mature, the more that I experience, the more I appreciate him and his courage to constantly evaluate himself and his surroundings, his constant commitment to always become more true and more obedient to what's right. And even if that required admitting his own mistakes or evolving in his thinking, he was very fearless in terms of evolving and being able to step out and say, this is what I was, vehemently, I was speaking this really strongly at one point, and now I've had an evolution in my thinking, and so this is me now. So when I got to the end of that book, this person that I thought was the most courageous and truthful person, who was putting all of these thoughts that I had in my mind and in my heart into the most eloquent words that I could imagine. At the end of that book, he lived a lot of his life believing that it was impossible to unlearn, for dominators who come from a dominator culture, to unlearn the dominator thinking that we have been taught since before we have the ability to even start knowing ourselves or making decisions. We're taught domination. We're taught white supremacy. We're taught male patriarchy, male supremacy. We're taught this current form of economic domination. We're taught all of these we're taught colonialism. We're taught all kind of cultural supremacy and all kind of cultural chauvinism. We're taught all these dominator thinking. And we're ingrained with these things, we're indoctrinated with these things before we even are of an age where we can start making decisions about what kind of people we want to be. We're taught these things before that point. We're brainwashed. We're a very, very brainwashed culture. And Malcolm lived the majority of his life, and when they killed him, he was only 40 years old, which in Islam, you're really just an adult when you become 40 years old. You're a youth until there's a certain age from when you're born until when you are around puberty time. That's being a child. And then from puberty time until 40, you're a youth. And then after 40, you're actually considered an adult. And so he just reached that stage when he was killed. And all throughout his life, he believed, as many people believe, who especially believe in black liberation, that it was impossible for white people to unlearn dominator thinking in a way that actually mattered. Because there haven't been a lot of examples, especially known to the mainstream society, there haven't been a lot of examples of that happening. And so he believed that. He went to Mecca and learned more about Islam and experienced people who are in bodies that would be called white in America, but they didn't have the air of whiteness. Whiteness is a concept that was created about 500 years ago. Prior to that, it didn't exist. And the only reason when we study this, and I've been studying it for a lot of my life, we study as we go around the world, we see that white is a very fluid, kind of lucid idea that doesn't necessarily refer to anything or to anyone specifically other than the idea of being superior. It's just a relative term of superiority. So when we go to Brazil, there's white Brazilians. And we go to Thailand, there's white Thai people. But if they come to America, they're no longer white. But in their society, they're white. So it just basically means this idea of white supremacy that the closer you are to whiteness, the more superior you are, and the further you are from that, the more inferior you are. And so Malcolm believed for a long time that wasn't possible until he met people who would be called white in America, but he said they had a different air about them. So he said his whole adult career he had believed that learning Islam, studying Islam could cure black people of the inferiority complex that was ingrained in them. But once he traveled to Mecca, he believed that Islam could actually, that connection with humanity, that connection with living the world through humanity could actually reform white people as well. And so when I read that, I said to myself, oh, well, I'm a Muslim. I didn't even think about it. I didn't know I had to know Muslims, didn't know that I had to go anywhere, didn't know what to do from that point on. But that was the transition that I made in my mind. This being Black History Month, I think really exposes such an enormous issue that we have in our culture and in our society, in my estimation, and that is that we live in a society that's built on a lot of lies, but they're very sophisticated lies. You know, when your children, when they're 3 and 4 years old, they lie to you in ways that you can check. You know, did you brush your teeth? Yes. You know what I mean? And you go in, well, your toothbrush is dry. You know what I mean? That you can check that, and you can prove that to be wrong. But then once they get around 13, I have a 5-year-old and a 13-year-old, and the way they lie is very, very different. A 13-year-old gives you the impression, they deceive you, but everything that they say is an actual true statement. So that you can't say that anything that they said is a lie. There's no verifiable lies in there, but they tell you very selected lies to lead you to a point to where what you believe from these series of little true factoids that you've been told is still untrue. And in our society, I think that a lot of the dominant narratives and beliefs that we hold about ourselves and about people and about the world are the result of these lies of omission, and they're very dangerous. This being Black History Month, some of the main ones that come to mind is that in our society, we're basically taught that the origin of African American people is slavery. We don't know much about them. We're not taught much about them before slavery, before enslavement. And we even call them slaves. Think about the fact that we call a human being a slave. This is a precious human life. And we're defining them by what's being done to them, something that they didn't choose. You know, people in the Black freedom movement don't say slaves, they say enslaved. Enslaved Africans, to enslaved human beings, to basically describe a condition or a situation that people are in, but that situation doesn't define the people. But what do we know of African people before we captured them and brought them to these shores? What do we know about them? Not much. It's a group of people who invented the sciences, literature, culture, music, dance, religious systems. These are people who advanced all of those things in the world. And one of the major lies of omission that we're told is that we're made to believe that their origin is in slavery. So everything after that is relative progress. Everything's better than that. So like, yeah, you know, Jim Crow, but you started as a slave. So you ought to be happy that you're no longer a slave. So just think about the way that we're oriented, the way that our minds are trained to think about things and about people. Another one that comes to mind is 9/11. 9/11, 3,000 precious human beings lost their lives. About 2/3 of them were white, and 1/3 was not. But think about the imagery that we saw after 9/11. We turn on the news. You see these 9 Arab men on one side of the screen, and on the other side of the screen you get a constant reel of the janitors. When the janitors wasn't the custodians or the custodial workers, wasn't the you know, people that were running messages and the people in the mailroom. We constantly see firefighters. We were constantly shown this reel, this continuous reel of firefighters. And anybody that has a chance to do a little research about the hiring practices of New York City firefighters and the history of that, it's been very exclusive. So we see all of these pictures of these middle class and working class, majority white men who were heroes, and they are heroes. Nothing can take away their hero status. But we see this picture of these people on one side and these 9 Arab men on the other side. And so when nobody's overtly saying to you, Arabs are killing white men, that's the way that it's framed. And so much of these things drive us we're in the passenger seat in a vehicle with a blindfold on, and they drive us through the forest of information, all of this true information. And they drop us off at a place and then let us get out, drop us right on the edge of a conclusion, and then allow us to get off, take the blindfold off, and leave us right there. And then we take the last step and feel as though that's our opinion. I formed this opinion on my own. This is the way that we're led to believe. So one other thing that I just want to share, and I'm just sharing stuff. This is just sharing just thoughts. I want to share a little bit about the early Islamic community that I know a lot of us don't know, because I didn't know it until I started studying Islam. And 1 in 5 people in the world is Muslim. 1.5 billion people. So anytime you have a group of people that's that big, it's important. That's an important thing to learn and understand. Not because everybody's supposed to become Muslim, not because everybody's going to agree, but if something is sacred to 1 in 5 people on the earth, then as citizens of the earth that share this world together, we ought to learn something about what that is and where that comes from. The early Muslim were called a rebellion as well. Islam was started, and you know, Muslims believe that the entire legacy of prophets are all prophets from God. And some of them are named in the Quran, but the scholars in Islam say that there were upwards of 1,500 throughout time that aren't all mentioned. And many of the scholars agree that there's a high probability that people like Confucius and people like other religious teachers throughout time, that there's a high probability that these people were prophets from God as well, that all taught a similar message. And these prophets include Moses and Jesus and Abraham and all of the prophets that, you know, that the Abrahamic faith believe in as well. So we believe Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to be a member in that succession of prophets that came to speak this one universal message of oneness, the oneness of God, that, you know, we all have ways of understanding the Creator. We all have ways of understanding our spirituality. But if you get down to the center of it, we're all unified in what we really believe. If we boil it all down and take the language away, take the argument away, take the philosophical stuff away, and get down to what do we really believe, that there's a unity in that. The unity of human beings. The lack of, that there's not a superiority in somebody's humanity of one person over another person. And the aristocracy in Mecca at that time saw that as being very, very problematic and very dangerous to their way of life. And so, without criticizing anybody, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the people around him started a community. They built a little community of people that agreed with them, and they met privately in their homes, and they were persecuted, and eventually they left and went to another city at the invitation of another city. The city is called Medina now. So that's not true. The first place they went was Ethiopia. They went to Ethiopia, and there was a Christian king in Ethiopia. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, this man in Ethiopia, he's a pure Christian, he's a true Christian, and his heart, because of the things that we believe in, his heart won't allow him to turn us over to people that mean us harm. And so he went there. He sent his earlier followers there because they were being tortured and they were being starved and all these things were, you know, being oppressed. So they went there, and the aristocracy from Mecca also went there and tried to get them back. And this king, who was an ally with the Meccans at the time, this king said to them, these people have done nothing offensive to you. They haven't broken any laws. And what I believe and what they believe is no. He took his staff, and there's a story, he took his staff and drew a line and said, the difference between us and them is no bigger than this line, and we'll protect them. And he actually stuck his neck out in a diplomatic sense to protect those people. So they went there, and then they got an invitation from Medina, from a Jewish city. And they went to this city that was run by the Jewish community, and that community there asked the Muslims to come there and establish a city. And that's what they did. They established an early community. The Jewish houses of worship were respected and maintained, and the people lived together. And then the Meccans began to attack them. So there was no talk of warfare. There was no talk of fight until they started to be attacked, until they were being oppressed for years and years. They suffered this oppression nonviolently for years and years. And the Meccans, finally, the aristocracy, the dominant culture, gave them the warning that we're going to come and we're going to slaughter you. And that's when in the Quran there started to be revelations. Self-defense, fighting in self-defense is prescribed for you even though it's completely against your nature to fight. The words are, fighting is prescribed for you to defend yourselves and to defend your freedom even though you hate fighting, even though you hate the idea of taking up arms against anybody. And sometimes you hate a thing that's actually good for you and you love things that are bad for you. And so these decrees were given. So I just share these things, just share a few of these things. And if you want, we can have a conversation about what you want to have a conversation. These are just the ideas that were in my head on the way over here. But more than anything else, I share these things because of the fact that we cannot trust people whose goal is domination. Domination in all of its forms. We cannot trust these people to inform us about each other. We have to learn about each other from each other. We can't learn, there's no reason for us to learn about Muslims from the news when we got, who knows how many Somalis live in the Twin Cities? Anybody have a number of how many Somali people live in the Twin Cities? It's a lot. There's no reason for us to learn about what Muslims are from the news, and we got so many neighbors. There's no reason for us to have this conversation. I know that people in this room, you know, we're not here because we talk like this, but there's no reason for us to learn about this concept of illegals from the news. We have a very rich, thriving community of Mexican-American brothers and sisters that live in the Twin Cities. There's no reason for us to constantly learn about each other from sources that don't have our cooperation in mind, that don't have our humanity in their focus. They're here to sell us stuff, And the number one thing that they're here to sell us is ideas. And so we've got to get our ideas for ourselves and from each other. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We've got a couple minutes left. If anyone here has any questions, got a mic and I can just pass this along.
Peace, Brother Ali.
Peace.
I just wanted to ask, in terms of with our theme of rebellion, basically, I kind of wanted to ask about the Occupy movement, and I just wanted to ask you personally, at what point does does the struggle get to? I think I was intrigued by the fact that you were arrested, you went to jail for what you believed in, and I went to some of the Occupy stuff too. But I have to say, when I heard the police were coming, I had to get out, for me and my family. So I guess I'm wondering, in your mind, for you, what is that point where it's like, I need to commit a civil act of disobedience because there's so much injustice happening? Like what did it have to get to you in your mind to get there?
Well, that's a great question. And I think what it really gets to is the fact that, kind of back to this idea of rebellion. What's a rebellion to one person, or what is a riot to one person is an uprising to another. And it depends on what are we loyal to. The Muslims say that the human being is an obedient creature. And the question is, to what am I going to be obedient? And to what degree am I willing to sacrifice for that obedience? A lot of us are obedient to our egos. And that's true of me too. I'm terrible, huge ego, that's out of control. Every good thing I do has my ego in it too. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, I have to just, pray and hope, constantly work on that, and then pray and hope that those good things are accepted from whatever good there was in the intention, because my ego is all through it. And so that's the way that I understand life, is to what am I going to be loyal, and to what degree am I willing to suffer and sacrifice for that? Because we all have something that we're loyal to, and we all choose those things over something else, and we all sacrifice for them. I'm also loyal to biscuits and sweet potato pie and my physical, and I pay the price for that. I just went back to the gym after being gone, and I weighed in 270 damn pounds, man. That's the biggest I've been my whole life. Like when I married my wife, I was 220. I came home like, man, I'm very sorry. But all of us have something that we're dedicated to, and we pay the price for that dedication, The Occupy movement in particular, nothing will make you more aware of how deceitful the media is than being covered by the media. Like on my Wikipedia page, and I know it's Wikipedia, but my son is in 8th grade, and they let him use Wikipedia as a source in his reports. Yo, I'm not making this up. I have on my Wikipedia page, I have godchildren that I have no idea who these people are. And my man Ashanti, make some love for Ashanti, please, because he came out and drove me here. And, yeah. Ashanti does all the real work. I just get to show up and just run my mouth. But I thought about emailing that to you and being like, hey, I need you to figure out how to change this. But I just want to leave it just as a constant reminder to myself that, nothing is what it appears to be. And the Occupy movement, I think, was a really great thing, and it was grossly miscovered by the media. When we start to see these things, I think the dominators, one of the things that they really love to do is make us think that everything in our life is just an isolated incident. So that when something is covered or handled wrong, they say, well, they want to quarantine that thing and move it to the side and say, well, let's talk about this one incident because they can argue you down about it. Trayvon Martin is a great example of that. And this other boy that just got shot for playing loud music, and the man murdered a child and then got convicted of attempted murder for somebody who's dead, for a child who's dead. they want us to look at these things as isolated incidents. But if I was an investigator and if I was investigating homicides and I started to see a pattern, a very strange, very peculiar, and very consistent pattern in these things, I would be a bad investigator if I didn't start to draw the connections between these things and start realizing that we're dealing with a serial killer, or we're dealing with if I'm investigating bank robberies and every single one of them, this is a true story, and I think they wrote it into The Sopranos, but there was a bank robber that got really nervous at every job and used to poop he used to poop at all his jobs. And so I would be a terrible investigator if I didn't happen to just notice that, like, all of these bank robberies around town, there's a pile of crap in the corner, But this is what we're instructed to do. So the Occupy movement was really mishandled. I personally thought the Occupy movement was a cool idea. I thought it was a good thing in general because it got people into the streets talking, it created space. But what I noticed is that it was a lot of racially and economically privileged people that were feeling like they were starting the movement. And the reality is that this country, America is America because this land was stolen by Native American people. And America is America because enslaved Africans were brought here and forced to build it for free. This is in the formation of America just as much as the founding fathers, just as much as anything else. So in order for us to, and it was at that point that we started making decisions about what the value of a human being was going to be. It was at that moment. So in my mind, the way that I see it is that every other breach of human rights that's come since then the precedent was set by those two things. And so until those two things are made right, we have not corrected the view of what we estimate the value of a human being to be. And once we say that it's not good enough to be a human being, you have to be a member of a certain group, whether it's white, whether it's Christian, whether it's middle class or better, whether it's straight, whether it's maleness. And once we say that being a human being, it isn't the ticket. That doesn't get you dignity and respect. You got to be part of some group. Then what we've done is we've devalued the stock for humanity in our own selves. And so we're saying, when we do that, we say my humanity isn't what's great about me, my whiteness is what's great about me. My humanity is not what's great about me, it's my maleness, it's my straightness, it's my Christianity, it's my money, it's my whatever. And so we lose touch with our own humanity. And so the work for justice isn't charity work. And whenever people approach it like that, and I'm in these circles all the time, it's bullshit. 90% of the people that are doing the work, there are 10% that really are coming from, and I believe they're all coming from good intentions, but so much of it is about, well, we're going to establish equity in this city for you black people so that you can, because we're nice, because of how good we are, But the reality is that our destiny is all tied up together, and you can't be a human being by yourself. You can't be white by yourself either. You gotta have somebody to be better than. There's no such thing as whiteness independent of somebody else to be non-white or an other. And so, all of these things kind of come back to this idea. So the Occupy movement was really a really cool thing, but I noticed there was a problem with it. So there were some people that had the idea in Minneapolis to take these protesters and put their physical bodies in the people that were front line. People that were losing their homes in North Minneapolis, and actually see if we could have some victories there. And it was successful. I believe it was very successful. Not only did we save about 20 homes that definitely would have gone into foreclosure, and people would have been homeless, but also there was a homeowners bill of rights passed in the state of Minnesota, and the legislators came to us and said, had you guys not been out there forcing this issue like that, that gave us the leverage that we need to say, look, this is an issue, the people want this, we need to move this forward. And he said, had you guys not been out there raising hell and causing us all this tax money, because also it was a lot of tax money to arrest all of us every time we did certain things. That's true, and that's not, and the Islamic teachers differ about whether what I did was an Islamic thing or not, because technically, when you live in somebody's culture, when you live in a society, you're not supposed to violate their laws, and so what I did was a questionable thing, but I made the choice to do it because they weren't covering us in the news anymore. They were trying to sweep it under the rug, and I knew that if I got arrested, then it would be in all the newspapers. You know what I mean? And so I did that. But I did it with a whole lot of privilege. You know, the police treat you really good. The guy that took my fingerprints had to do it over and over again because he was so nervous because he thought I was a celebrity. So he was like, I've never booked a celebrity before, Brother Ali. And he was like trembling and shaking. And I'm like, yo, you're a cop. And I'm in your custody. You have a gun. And you're scared of me. Like you could kill me right now. But, you know. So I did it from a position of privilege, and it was a decision that I made.
All right, we're going to do one last question. By the way, your mugshot is pretty epic. It looks a lot better than my mugshot, I'll be honest.
Thanks for coming out this morning. I want to touch a little bit on what I think you started to say about ideas and the responsibility to have our own. As creative people, whether we're musicians or designers or engineers or writers, we have the ability to deliver ideas in ways that transcend traditional forms of information and education. Do you think that artists and creative people have particular responsibility for making the world a better place?
I don't think we have any more or less responsibility. And you know, in the Islamic tradition, everything is every skill that somebody masters is called an art. So medicine is the medical arts. That's a term in Western science too, the medical arts. You know, all of these things, you know, education is an art, and anybody that's tried to educate people knows that there's definitely an art to that. That's an art, you know, that nobody ever feels like they master. And that's also the idea, is that we never master these things. But I think that there's something about the fact that art becomes part of people's mind. Like there's rap lyrics and song lyrics and movie things that are part of my brain. You know what I mean? And I think them every time. You know, I have a friend that made this song with like a really disgusting line about the Marriott Hotel. And every time I see a Marriott Hotel, that line goes through my brain, whether I want it to or not. I saw one of those hotels when I was in Mecca, where I'm in Mecca, you know, with 3 million other people dressed in 2 cloths with no underwear on, you know, sleeping outside, like in the most sacred state that I could imagine being in. And I saw the Marriott, and I said this line in my head, like this line went through my head that I won't repeat, but yeah, Marriott. Just think of all the things that rhyme with Marriott, and yeah. What's that? I said beyond. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I in that instance, I do think there is a little bit more of a responsibility. But I also think that culture, when people practice culture and really master their arts and master their culture, especially for people who the dominant narrative says that you're not important. For people like that to master their culture, regardless of what the text is, the context is always that if my culture is important, that means I'm important. So, you know, little kids that master, you know, double dutch or the patty cake game. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever been around kids, you know, in the hood, but I mean, like double dutch, patty cake, you know, braiding hair, rhymes and jokes and all of these things. Kids that master that and treat it like an art, there's something unsaid and unspoken in there that my culture is important means that I'm important. And I think that that's a really revolutionary act for the person practicing art and culture. But then also, you know, I do think that there definitely is a responsibility with the fact that it becomes part of people's lives. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Well, can you give it up one more time?
Thank you guys.